Thanks for joining us and welcome to Newsnight. I am Ladi Akeredoluale. We are continuing with our series of interviews on the 50th anniversary of the end of the Civil War, looking at healing, reconciliation, and reintegration efforts and how successful they have been for the country. My guest is the President General of the Apex pan-Igbo socio-cultural group, Ohanaeze Ndigbo, Chief John Nwodo. President General, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
This is a very sensitive topic. 50 years down the line, one would have expected that it would be not quite so sensitive. Time, as they say, heals all wounds. And it is in that spirit that I wanted you to take a look at it. 50 years after the Civil War ended, there were 3 R's that were the famous mantra in the immediate aftermath. And then you had the desire for healing, reconciliation, and reintegration. Now, 50 years down the line, how far along the paths to healing, to reconciliation, to reintegration are we? Or are we already there?
Sadly, we're not. This gives you an opportunity to say, may the souls of all Nigerians, from all divide in the Civil War, rest in peace. Ordinarily, if I died during the war, I'd be very angry with both Nigeria and Biafra. Because the reasons that we plunged ourselves into war still persist in our country. You talked about the principles on which Gowon declared the war ended. They are far from achieved. Reconstruction, reconciliation, and rehabilitation. The Southeast remains infrastructurally the worst part of Nigeria today. Every major highway that is federal government responsibility in the Southeast is in disrepair, including the ones under construction. I mean, it used to take me 2.5 hours to go from Enugu to Port Harcourt. Now it takes me about that length of time to get to Owerri, or at the Umuahia junction, where I have to get to Owerri. It used to take me less than an hour to go to Onitsha before the war. And now it takes like 2-3 hours. I used to go back to University of Ibadan, Jos campus, where I did my prelim, by rail from Enugu. The train was 2 categories of plane, the local and the limited. The limited had very few stops. The local had several stops. I slept off in the plane until I arrived Jos. Now, that rail station in Enugu is moribund. I cannot recollect the last time a train stopped by there. There is no construction of any rail line going on in the Southeast. Navigation by sea in this country is only through, commercially speaking, is only through Lagos. Port Harcourt is underutilized, and so is Calabar. And Lagos is so congested because of our Papa Wharf that the traffic grid there, it cripples the economy of Lagos. No other country in the world would subject itself from point of view of security to reliance on a single channel of sea communication. It's strategically wrong. And we've been lured in the main by people with military experience. And the fact that neither Onitsha, Uguta, Port Harcourt Akwa Ibom, with very deep sea reserves, have been developed sufficiently to offload the congestion in Lagos. It's deliberate, in my view. I don't know why any country would like to do this kind of thing. As I grew up as a child, Uji River Power Station was powering the whole of Eastern Nigeria. No doubt, demand for electric power was less then than it is now. But the fact that there was a power station working, and we built new power stations up and down the country, and nobody has resuscitated the River Power Station, is deliberate. The coal resources that powered the River Power Station are still powering plants in China, in Europe, and America. The coal mine in Enugu is virtually dead. The Port Harcourt refinery is still undergoing rehabilitation since the end of the war. And we are paying colossal sums of money in fuel subsidy and the cost of importation of fuel products. It's economically disadvantageous. Therefore, the reason for this must be political. Yes, my people believe that since the end of the Civil War, no Igbo man has headed the federal government. Unless, of course, you mean that President Jonathan, who comes from what was known as Biafran territory, has headed the federal government. But we know how long he headed it. And so it looks like a deliberate policy. And one of our traditional rulers made a public statement to the effect that if there was a conspiracy between the North and the West, that Igbos should be kept out of the political hierarchy, it was now no longer a workable agreement, because the people who were visiting the punishment on are largely those who did not participate in the war or knew anything about the war. I went to university at the end of the war in the University of Ibadan, and I became president of Students' Union in a Yoruba majority student population. And it gave me the feeling that Nigeria was workable. I became a devout Nigerian. To the point that when Dr. Azikiwe and Shehu Shagari were running for president, I was on the side of President Shehu Shagari. Because in my view then, Zik belonged to a party whose territorial spread in terms of followership could not fulfill the requirement for 12 2/3 of the states of Nigeria. Ethnic considerations did not come to my mind. And eventually, the MPN and the MPP had to have an accord. And an Igbo man was vice president. And I was glad that soon after the war, barely 9 years or so after the war, an Igbo man could become the second most important person in the executive branch of government in Nigeria. I didn't know it was tokenism. That was the end of it. It's never happened.
I wish kind wire you gon' need to light up your light. Oh man, the quality wire. Now which kind cable you gon' need to light up your house? Oh man, the quality cable. Coleman quality. Coleman wire. Coleman durable. Coleman cable. Coleman tank. Coleman cable for any kind of project. Coleman be the come and see, come and see. Come and be the Coleman won't light up your light. Come and be the come and see. Come and be the COLEMAN. Quality, quality. Durable. Oh yeah. Now come and be the Baba.
50 years is a long time, even though in the life of an administration or a country is not that really long. But it is a long time. Things have become very, very complicated. I like the example you gave. It seems that as if at an individual level, personal, family level, people have moved on in the sense that there are many Igbos who are married to Westerners, who are married to Northerners, as you mentioned, and the other way around. There are many children who speak all three languages in the country, major languages that is, and so on. And then concepts like unity schools and the NYSC program have meant that for many of the generation you described after the war ended, who did not experience the war, they don't really see the differences between Igbos, Hausas, and Yorubas because for them, in many instances, their best friends are from some of these other places, and some of them have married into those places and have acquired families of their own who are now mixed, and therefore their opinion. I mean, for example, you're a Yoruba man who's married to an Igbo lady whose mother is Hausa. It's become a lot more complicated to delineate the ethnic structure. Do you think this has proved to be an advantage, and that maybe what you talked about as the disadvantages are merely at the organized government level? Or is it still that in spite of all that, when push comes to shove, these strictures will still come to bear?
I think you must give it to the Igbos that in terms of integration, in terms of being outgoing, and in terms of feeling at home with non-Igbos, they are really the typical Nigerians. If you go to any state out of Igbo land, the highest population of non-indigenous there are Igbos. I cannot say the same for Igbo land, There are very few non-Igbos making economic investment in any part of Igbo land. There is hardly any city in Nigeria outside Igbo land that you go to today that you do not find an Igbo-owned hotel, an Igbo-owned hospital, an Igbo-owned secondary school, an Igbo-owned primary school. Some even have an Igbo university. In Ogun State, there is a proprietor of a university there who is Igbo. In Sokoto State, there is an Igbo man who manufactures tomato puree. Igbos not only are mercantile, but they feel at home wherever they prosper. But this is not happening
The other way
around. I mean, I've lived in Enugu all my life. I do not see any Fulani, Tiv, Yoruba, Birom man owning a hotel in Enugu. I haven't seen one. All I see are those who trade in cattle or a few wares. And they don't even open beautiful, strong, expansive stores. They just sell their wares and get away. But an Igbo man stays in Lagos, buys land, lives there, There are many Igbos in Lagos today who cannot speak Igbo. They speak Yoruba better than Igbo. To all intents and purposes, they are Yoruba. Because their ethnic and cultural affinity is already diluted by their area of habitation. There are many Igbos in northern Nigeria who speak more Hausa than they speak Igbo. They hardly even know their villages. So, this miscegenation, this building of familial relationships have been encouraged more by Igbos than by non-Igbos. It was fashionable at the end of the war to take a wife in Igbo land. Maybe it was the price of conquest. But
the price of conquest.
I'm not quite sure that it is as fashionable then. There are more Igbos going out of Igbo land to marry than there are non-Igbos coming into Igbo land to marry. But those who are getting married to Igbo girls are They are doing so because there are so many Igbos outside Igbo land. And when you get to know somebody personally and like the person's behavior, and he lives right in your locality, and your parents know the parents, it's easier to convince your parents that this is somebody I can marry. She's been brought up here, she knows our culture, she respects it, and the parents have lived happily with us. But you see, right back in the subconscious, I listened to one of those variously described as belonging to the caucus of this government. I don't want to use the words that are referred to. Grant a press conference saying Igbos, if they want to be president of Nigeria, must belong. What does that mean? I do not know why a child I gave birth to after the war, who thinks that she's Nigerian, she's never heard of Biafra, she didn't participate in it, should be told to belong. Or rather, the government should give Igbos a sense of belonging.
Now which kind wire you gon' need to light up your light, eh? Oh man, na quality wire. Now which kind cable you gon' need to light up your house, eh? Oh man, na quality cable. Coleman quality. Coleman wire. Coleman durable. Coleman cable. Coleman tank. Coleman cable for any kind of project. Come and be the come and see. Now come and be the Coleman won't light up your light. Now come and be the come and see. Now come and be the COLEMAA. Quality, quality. Durable. Now come and be the Baba.
Intents and purposes at this time. I was just reading in the media that there's a fund that was kept aside that is to build the second Niger Bridge. That's a huge project, and it's in the southeast. Many of the roads you described as being unmotorable and so on, attention, the president is talking about attention there now. Through budgetary allocations, the Ministry of Works and so on, recognizing what you talked about the Southeast and the issue of projects. And then some of your, I don't want to use the word subjects, but the governors in the Southeast are also making efforts, joint efforts now to grow, develop things in the Southeast, encourage Igbos and non-Igbos to come to the Southeast? Or is all this just a little too late or too little to be significant?
They are not fundamental. To begin with, the military structured a constitution which was a conquest document. The constitution reduced the whole of Igbo land to 5 states and 90-something local governments. Now, all the revenue allocation formula supplanted the one at independence and used local governments and states as units for distribution of revenue. So, for every federal collected revenue, irrespective of the fact that the bulk of them come from the southeast and the south-south, which are the oil-producing areas of Nigeria, we get the list. There is no state government in the southeast that can, on the basis of its federal collected revenue and internal generated revenue, pay salaries and continue with capital projects. No. They are living on loans. They are living on interventions from the federal government. It doesn't exist at all. There were times that children enrollment was used as an index of revenue allocation. Children enrollment in schools is no longer the case now. Now, geographical area is even used in preference to children enrollment. It's not government, not about individuals. Our population commission has never used ethnic identity as an index of determining our ethnic divisions in the country. How many are Yorubas, Igbos, are Fulanis, or Hausas? No. You talk about the Niger Bridge. Since the end of the war, in fact, I remember when Jakande was Minister of Works, the Niger Bridge has been reflected on the federal budget without any attention. Speaking for this administration, the Niger Bridge had been awarded by President Jonathan, but when President Buhari came to power, he suspended the contract. May well be for good reasons in terms of the structure of the contract, but the truth is that he suspended it for more than 3 years before he revisited it. Niger Bridge is an economic life wire for the country. The federal highways in the south is carry more traffic than any highway in the federation. I don't know why, but they do. So if our economy will be developed on the basis of statistical necessities that will impact on the economy, one would expect that Onitsha, Enugu, Ubulafo, Port Harcourt, Onitsha, Owerri, these will be Aba, Port Harcourt. Look, if you open up Aba to Port Harcourt, the seaport in Port Harcourt will come alive. And the amount of resources that will move there, international, foreign investment, and what have you, we won't be suffering the way we are suffering today. Not just Igbos, but Nigerians. It will be life more abundant. But just to keep them down, it appears that there is a policy saying, these guys, we cannot let them get up for some time. And that's the feeling amongst every Igbo man. And you see, when you talk about restructuring of the federation, they tell you our problem is not structure, it's process. And Igbos see a party in government that has in its manifesto restructuring of the federation, that appointed a committee chaired by the governor of Kaduna State, that gave arms and legs and teeth for this restructuring, described their concept of restructuring. They gave oil fields in the continental shelves to federal government, but oil fields inland to state governments. They gave domestic security to state governments. They espoused state policy. This was a document of APC. But the president, John threw this away. And on camera said, our problem is not structure, but process. For Igbos, this means he is not interested. And on the corollary, a number of Fulanis are involved in attacking Nigeria through Boko Haram. So if we went to war, Fulanis have also gone to war against Nigeria. And wherever they occupy a territory, they hoist a flag. They depose the emir and appoint theirs. That's treasonable. How many of them are in court? What about those that come under the camouflage of headsmen? Loot, kill, and supplant local villages and hoist their own flags. How many of them have been declared terrorists? And my own children, just for saying, we are being treated badly, are called terrorists. Does this call for, is this a language of reconciliation?
At that point, let me ask you this as a way of rounding up this discussion. Some have said we're at a crossroads, as you say now. Something drastic, something urgent needs to be done. And some have suggested that to enhance healing, reconciliation, reintegration, we could adopt, with some tweaking, the Rwandan example. Rwanda had what was referred to as a genocide in 1994, and a lot of people, a higher percentage of its population than that of Nigeria was killed in a much shorter space of time. But that in the aftermath of that, for example, Rwanda decreed that there was nothing like ethnic group.
Yeah.
You were Rwandan, period. And that has been sustained up till date. That's just one of the provisions. There were other things that were done. As you sit now as President General of the apex body in Igbo land, what are the 1, 2, 3, 4 key things that you would like to see, if it is along those lines of the Rwandan example that I gave, or if it is along another line, that need to now be immediately done to further the cause of this healing, reconciliation, and reintegration? Because from what you say, there are a lot of angry people. People are still angry,
Yes.
even though so much time has passed, but they still remain angry. And those who have come after them are still angry, or even angrier than the original victims, if you like. What is to be done?
A number of things. To begin with, on the personal level, we need our leadership to have a more reconciliatory posture. I grew up in a town, Enugu, where the elected mayor of Enugu was a Katsina man called Umoru Altini. He was voted for by Igbos living in Enugu against an Igbo opponent. He was campaigned for by Dr. Azikiwe as leader of NCNC. The very fact that he was not an Igbo man, but he became mayor of Enugu, built the spirit of unity. At this, contemporaneously, Chief Okonkwo, in what is now called Kwankwaso town, was elected to the House of Chiefs in northern Nigeria. At the same token, Azikiwe had become leader of government business in Lagos. Mbono Jike had become deputy speaker. And Zik almost became premier of Western Nigeria, but for the carpet crossing. These ethnic divisions never played to the extent that they are playing today. We need an affirmative action of all leaders in Nigeria, all political leaders. I mean, if you go to most Nigerian states now, you have to be an indigene to be chairman of local government. Nobody would give a stranger the opportunity to take a flag, no matter how popular. But it is obvious to me that in future, our children will rebel against it. Because the demographic characteristics of the urban towns now are defying ethnic origin.
Chief Nwodo, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
That's today's episode of Newsnight. Do let us know what you think of the conversation. The handles are right there on your screen. Tomorrow, while still examining this same issue, I'll be talking to the Minister of Labor and Productivity, Dr. Chris Ngige. I'm Ladi Akere Doluale. Thanks for joining us, and goodbye.